Last week we had an engaging discussion on the topic, the three voices within: the voice of the mind, the voice of the intellect, and the voice of the conscience. We did learn that throughout our lives, these three voices continuously keep almost echoing from within, influencing our lives, influencing the directions, influencing the choices, influencing the course of life. And we need to be very clear to be able to decipher. We need to be very clear to be able to identify the characteristics of each voice. What is the voice of the mind? What is the intellect vis-a-vis the voice of conscience? Now, due to time constraint, I couldn't take up a couple of questions. So just for the benefit, I know Vijayji had some clarification. I said we will revisit. Vijay Raghavanji, would you mind quickly repeating or clarifying what you sought last week, please?
Hariom Guruji.
Hariom, sir.
The first question was about conscience being relative with respect to time and the values prevailing. I mean, what seemed like something against conscience over a period of time changes with the change in values. The second question is that when somebody...
Can we take one by one, sir, please?
Yes, please.
Right. So the question you're asking is let me understand your question right. So are you asking, is conscience relative with reference to time and the values one entertains or appreciates? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
See, what is, okay, I will put it possibly in a simpler term where I'm more comfortable. What I feel something is wrong, doing something is wrong, depends on where I am, under what, in what society I am, and under what circumstances I am. Circumstances is, I think, stretching it. The society I am, the values around me are. I mean, is that true? I mean, is it something which I have?
See, conscience is relative to each individual, is subjective to each individual given your situation and circumstances and your conditioning, your knowledge, and your convictions. The conscience doesn't expect you to be anything greater than where you are. It doesn't expect you to be more wiser than what you are. It's very unfair, isn't it? You can't expect a child to be an adult. So it gives you the benefit of doubt. It gives you the provision to function at your optimum level. It accepts you what you are. But just see, we mentioned conscience. When conscience agrees and supports your convictions, you are true to yourself. Am I clear, sir? When convictions are supported by the conscience, I am not wrong. But when my conscience doesn't support my convictions, and convictions are molded by situations, circumstances, environment, conditioning, your knowledge, that all that ends up as your conviction. What you believe in is right today, which is relative. So when your conscience doesn't support, you're wrong. So when your conscience doesn't support an act or a thought, you experience a feel of an inner guilt. Isn't it? When there is a feeling of guilt within, that is when we say the conscience is pricking. Now, guilt is different to committing of a sin. What I'm saying is, just be very, very alert to pick up this idea. Sin, I could be committing a sin and yet not feel guilty. Means I could be doing something wrong and yet I don't feel guilty because I was ignorant of it. But yet I would face the consequences of that act. A simple example, I go into the kitchen, I touch a hot pan, which was just taken off the burner. I've committed something wrong. Means I've committed a sin, means I'm punished for my action. I've got my fingers burnt. But I did not know that it was a hot pan just off the burner. Would I feel guilty about it? Ignorance. I did not know. But having known, next time onwards, having gained the knowledge, having gained an understanding, having gained a certain perception, I'm expected to live by that understanding and knowledge and conviction. So I could have done something ignorantly. I don't feel bad about it because I did not know. But would I escape the law of that action? No. The law of cause and effect will function. But I don't feel bad about it because I didn't do it intentionally. So my intention protects me there. But yet I will have to face the law of what that action defines and determines. So just because you may commit a sin, you may commit a wrong action, but you may not feel guilty about it. Guilt comes in when you are aware of it, when you know you're not supposed to do it, and yet you continue to do it, and that's when your guilt comes and starts hurting you. So guilt always deals with your knowledge and conviction and your belief systems. It doesn't expect you to be all knowledgeable, all wise, and all knowing. In a relative sense, don't we say ignorance is bliss? I'm unaware that I could. So what we are saying is you can't seek shelter under ignorance. So therefore don't say, oh, thank you, sir. I rather be ignorant of many things and carry on doing whatever I want to do. No. You can't seek shelter under ignorance. But when you're ignorant, you don't feel guilty. That doesn't mean you're right. You will still have to pay the consequence of certain actions. Still have to pay the consequence of certain actions. Now, I'm narrating an example which I've heard from a guru. He talks of two kids who used to play every evening in a backyard. They had a huge lawn, and it used to attract all sorts of insects and bugs and grasshoppers as well. And this kid used to find joy in just picking up these grasshoppers and start simply plucking their legs. He will just pluck their legs and then throw the insect to obviously die a miserable death thereafter. Imagine your limbs and tentacles and all just being plucked away. And the boy used to tell him, man, what joy are you getting out of this act? Why are you doing it? But he just did playfully, and he didn't mind that friendly advice receiving from his friend. Don't do that. Now, many years later, the friend who was purview to this incident in his life, this boy, or this boy who grew up to be a youngster, a teenager, he was going on a two-wheeler. He was behind a lorry which was loaded with foundation stones, the foundation rocks. He was overtaking the lorry. The side latch opened up. Those rocks fell on him. Both his legs had to be amputated from waist down. The rest of his life, he lost his normalcy. Now, here is a person who is connecting two actions. Now, whether there is a cause and an effect, I know not. But remember, every action has a cause and an effect. It may not fructify immediately, but it takes time for it to function and express. But these two actions are being connected. Of an act being ignorantly, you pluck the legs of a grasshopper or some insect, and many years later, you lose your limbs. Now, did the boy feel the guilt of doing that act? No. But was the boy spared of the consequence of the action? No. He is accountable for that act. So therefore, the onus is on us to constantly keep raising the bar of knowledge and knowing and evolve. The moment you don't do that, you stagnate and you pay the price of your own ignorance and actions. But just because you don't feel guilty does not mean you're doing the right thing. So I just want to be clear that you've got to be very, very sure to listen to the conscience very clearly. Sometimes the conscience is very loud, yet you don't hear it because of the maze of other thoughts and the mental anxiety and the emotions and the disturbance around. If somebody is playing a marriage music, a marriage party or a function going on, I'll not be able to hear a few feet away because there's so much noise, so loud. So if your desires and the mind is very agitated, is vociferous, is too noisy with all the emotions, you'll not be able to heed the conscience within. Conscience is the only way you know you're going wrong, isn't it? So I could be committing a mistake and yet not know I'm going wrong. So the only respite for us is just to hear what is my conscience saying. But ignorance may immune you from listening to the conscience. You may not feel guilty, but you will not be spared for the consequences of your actions. Whether you know it or not, you'll not be spared. When you know it, you will pay the price of guilt. When you don't know it, you don't feel guilty, you still pay the price of your actions. I've just introduced another element into the equation of the conscience, just to give him perhaps a greater dimension to the same concept of conscience. You can't take it for granted. Just because you don't heed it doesn't mean you're right. Doesn't necessarily guarantee you're right. Many years later, don't we look back on our actions and repent? Then were you right then? Nay. Ignorance protected you. And even now your ignorance is protecting you. Beware. Watch out. What guarantee? It's not what you're doing. What guarantee you give yourself that you're doing the right thing? The only guarantee you can give is, have I consulted my conscience? That's all I can say. Have I consulted? Have I surrendered to it? Do I heed exactly what my conscience is saying? So just be very careful when you introduce the concept of feeling of guilt and committing an act of sin. I hope you're all able to gather this subtle difference. There's a subtle difference here. Are you all with me? It's like I started off the match with hitting a few sixes in the first over itself, So you have to come warm up. You can't enter a tournament without doing warm up. You have to do your warm up and come. So you need to exercise your intellect. You need to keep it active all the time so that the moment you get onto it, you're right from the very first ball, from the very first stroke. You're playing a game of golf. Like yesterday, one of my students, the doctor from Malaysia, a very dear student, and he says, I play golf. You say, Guruji, I'm putting so much effort very consistently, but when I go into the game of golf, uh, uh, three strokes are perfect, other two strokes go haywire because I'm not able to concentrate and keep my eye on the ball. When the club meets the ball, I have to be, I don't have to see where the ball is going, I have to be, isn't it, Sriniji? Your eyes, they say, have to be on the ball, and I keep missing that, and I keep paying the price for those two wrong strokes. So you need to be on the stroke, you need to be right on the ball, you need to make sure every stroke, every act is right to be able to. So you need to do a lot of, what I'm only trying to say is you need to be very, generally be prepared before you get into the class. If you are prepared, there will be a very dynamic consultation or a transaction, Otherwise, many a time it will go over you. All right, Vijayji, are you fine with the first question? Michelle, all okay? Difference between sin and feeling guilt. So can you sum it up for me, please? Maybe you're more clear than me. So just for the benefit of others, can you please sum it up? The difference between sin and feeling guilty.
Well, what you discussed was that guilt comes with intellect and knowledge. So if you perform an act and you are ignorant of it, then there's no guilt. But once you learn that lesson of something that's going to hurt you, basically, then you must heed basically the natural law. It is a lesson to be learned. So yes, you get one pass. Once you learn it, don't repeat it.
Yeah, correct. You all of us get a sort of a chance, as it were. But then, what is sin?
Sin is to go against your conscience and knowingly go against your conscience. Because the conscience is the voice of God. And if we know we are going against something we've already learned or through our intellect we have acquired, and we knowingly go against that, then that's the sin.
In fact, in most contexts, we would define sin that way. But in this context, I have defined it slightly different.
Because you're still going to pay for it eventually. Like the boy pulling the legs off, he lost his legs in return.
Correct. So sin is when you're ignorant of it, but still you continue to pay the price of the actions you perform. Guilt, as rightly said, is when knowledge, intellect comes into the equation, isn't it? When there's a clash between your conviction and your conscience, there is a guilt. You don't feel guilt, you committed a sin when you are ignorant about that act. But you're not spared for the consequences of the actions.
So the sin is still a sin. Sin is still a sin. If you're ignorant of it.
Sin is still a sin, but I don't feel that I've committed a sin. I don't go back and sit and worry about it or feel a sense of remorse because I don't think I've done anything wrong.
That doesn't spare you.
That doesn't spare us. Very true. In fact, rightly said, Michelle, sin is not in the action. Sin is in the reaction. Sin is not in the performance of an action. Sin is in the feedback you get after you have performed an action. You don't feel, let's say you have spoken little rashly to someone, or you haven't kept your emotions at control or bay, and later you feel I shouldn't have expressed myself that way. The fact that you feel bad about it is you're committed a sin. But here we say sin, you don't get a feedback because you're ignorant of it. Go back to the boy and the insect. There's no feedback. He hasn't got any feedback that he's doing anything wrong. Innocently, he has done an act. Innocence and ignorance doesn't protect you from the consequence of an action, but it only protects you from the feeling of guilt.
Yourself, yeah.
Yeah, yes. So Don't seek shelter in that ignorance. You cannot seek shelter. Therefore, you have to constantly surrender to this higher wisdom so that you expand your understanding and open yourself to that greater dimension of life. And here is a knowledge which deals about life and unfolds all those chapters of a life and prepares you to face them. Imagine, what baffles me is how can life go on without this knowledge? I just can't understand it. I simply can't understand. And I'm not saying I know everything what life has to throw at me, or neither am I saying that I've understood life, but I just can't understand. How can one plunge into this complex life without knowing how it's all designed and how does one go about it? I have not resolved it within my head. And what protects people is, Michelle?
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss, that's all. Ignorance is bliss. And somebody said, I wrote a letter to a guru and he heard him and he went back and he said, Guruji, I was a very happy man until I met you. Because after meeting you, I realized there's so much that I need to do. I need to undo and I need to learn so much about life. I was so happy until I met you, in that kind of a spirit. It's very true. Ignorance just immunes us from all that we are doing. Arunji, okay? Following? Right. Yes, Vijayji, your second question.
Guruji's second question was in the concept of society, in the context of society, that is. If we have to listen to the conscience, or rather, if we listen to our conscience and convert it into an action, the society has to automatically ensures that there are checks and balances, because you cannot act what you feel ought to be done because of checks and balances and what you are authorized or allowed to do, or what is your dharma. So under those circumstances, your inability to act or your acting out of turn creates mental disturbances. I mean, what is the way out? I'll give a very silly example. If I see someone doing something wrong on the street, which is maybe transgressing a law to some extent, I might feel like acting, but I cannot act because that's not my job. And if everybody start doing it, there's going to be chaos. At the same time, do I feel satisfied that I cannot act because I'm not allowed to act? Suppress my feeling?
So exactly the same feeling I had yesterday. I went into a hardware store. I was just pulling my car and just I was to get off. And a guy walks out of that hardware store and perhaps he was chewing the betel nut perhaps for an hour or two, I think so. And his mouth was full. He had to get rid of it, dispose it off. So he just walks out of the store and then does what he has to do. He just spits it out into the open and he goes back in. And as I drove there, just to go into the same store, I saw all this drama that floated. I felt very uncomfortable with that act, especially at times where you have to be conscious. Times of COVID, we don't have to be paranoid about it, but that guy didn't have a mask and he is just spitting wherever he wants to do what he wants to do. A thought came to me, I should go and tell that guy, man, can you please be careful? You might, Thank God I didn't say, because he would have given back his peace of mind. Who are you, man? You think you're a big guru, huh? You can lecture to anyone you want, whatever you want, whenever you want. He will just say, mind your own business. Knowledge is always taken, never given. I can see clearly where that person is going wrong, but it is none of my jurisdiction to interfere into their lives and tell what they should and what they shouldn't. Isn't it? It's none of my business. Therefore, they say MYOB, mind your own business, man. And yet it's true. My business is with my life. How am I concerned with others? If someone wants to lead a reckless life and drive recklessly, that is his life and his choices. All I can do is I don't become a victim of his reckless actions on the road. Do I start determining and deciding what is right for him, what is wrong for him? I cannot. Do I have control over all my actions? And have I attained that pinnacle of perfection? No. So therefore, wherever you think you can influence the society and transform it, please do. But when you think it is going to fall on deaf ears, just hold back. You can't take law into your hands. I can't be the custodian of his conscience and start determining what is right and what is wrong. Can I be the custodian of his conscience? Or since when have I become the custodian of others' conscience? It is obviously right that you are right and he is wrong, but yet you can't go about doing it. Therefore, each one is accountable to himself. As much as possible, let us be constructive in our thought and our intent. And if something needs to be corrected, by all means, please. But then you have to be very conscious, is the other person receptive? Because I didn't want to get into an argument with him. However right I am. I don't know whether that answers, but I think if one takes that approach, there's so much correction is required within. Believe me or not, if you really realize the amount of imperfections that is within, you will have no time for others. My job is to perfect myself. And the moment you become perfect, you become an inspiration, a beacon of light for others to follow. Generations will look up to you, sir. Rather than me sitting and correcting others, let me correct and evolve and realize myself. You will be an inspiration for generations to come. That's what these great men did. They resorted into a isolation and they just worked on themselves and transformed themselves. And what thereafter is history, isn't it? So if that can be our approach in a relative sense, none of us can, we all wish to aspire and reach that grand state of realization. But even if we are somewhere near there, I think we will be an example for others to look up to. In fact, one of the, I just conclude with this, it is often said not to fall a prey to this mistake people do, which is whenever you have a certain knowledge or an understanding, the general tendency is you go about unsettling others. So a wise man is said, don't unsettle the minds of the ignorant. Let them be what they are. Don't unsettle them. Rather, you can inspire them with your actions and let them look up to you and emulate you. So there are two contrasting approaches people take when they are knowledgeable. Either I go and unsettle them and say where they're wrong, or I continue to inspire them by my actions so that they may consider me as a role model and they can emulate. See, as a parent, I can either unsettle my child and want my child to follow the instructions or the values which I believe in and impose it onto her, or I continue to live the life with the standards I believe is right, and perhaps in the course of our life, she could consider me as a role model that I would want to achieve. I want to be what my dad is. And I can only make it happen by giving her the respect of what she wants to do, let her be what she is, and yet continue to maintain that high standards of environment which she's growing up in. So she constantly sees a father who has set a certain standard, not because he wants me to do it, because he does it because it's the right thing to do. And one does that over a period of time, you will be noted. And that change or transformation is a permanent change, rather than me trying to force my views onto them or others, which instantly people retaliate and reject and say, don't lecture to me, I've had enough of it. This challenge people have. So therefore, if one, it's difficult to hold on to your wisdom and keep it to yourself, and you're not being selfish there because you don't want to unsettle others, sir. One has to be very mindful of that. And yet, with liberty and freedom, do share. Right now, I'm sharing. I'm sharing to the extent I'm being asked to speak. I have to be mindful. I don't cross the line, isn't it, sir? I'm very mindful of that. I hope I have not crossed the line, thus far at least. Is that okay, sir?
Especially, yes, very, very okay, Guruji. Especially the last bit, I think that seems to answer everything, in the sense you still listen to the conscience and try to do to the best of your ability, but not get obsessed with it.
No.
And be an example and try to do something. I mean, like if somebody throws something, you pick it up and then put it in the waste paper basket, or some silly example. I mean, that possibly tells much more than taking a panga with it.
Yeah. And talking of an example, I think last week I got a feedback from, I think Badriji sent a note to Harishji. He forwarded to me. I thought it's a beautiful example of the conscience and how the conscience functions. The example he had taken was, maybe Harishji, could you explain it quickly? You remember? You recall the example?
Guruji, not exactly, but it had to do with the board.
Correct.
And when you write on the, I'll just capture it.
Yeah. He just speaks of a board, and if the writings on the board are akin to your thoughts and actions, and if the color of the writings is of the same of the backdrop of the board, the writings are not seen. But if the writings, which are the actions and thoughts, are of a different color, it gets highlighted.
Can I point out, Guruji?
Yes, please.
A thought occurred to me towards the end that our conscience is like the board on the wall, and all our thoughts, words, and actions are what we write on it. If the color of what we write is significantly different from the color of the board, it stands apart and could be the source of conflict. But if the color is nearly the same, it merges with the board and there is no dissonance with our inner voice. The concept being of confronting your conscience and being in tune with your conscience.
I thought it was a beautiful example, isn't it? Hmm. Hmm. There was another question that was also asked by Lakshmi Rajanma. There was a clarification she had sought. If you're there, would you want to clarify, please?
Pranam Guruji.
Namaskar, Ma. Hari Om.
Hari Om. I just had a very simple question. When, like, just like the story goes, when the hunter offers his hunt to the Shivaling, not knowing that it is. So when you're saying that right now, he's doing it unknowingly, this is all he knows. And this is what he's got, and that is what he's offering wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But when I'm listening to you now, will he be punished later? Because, like you said about the grasshopper, the little boy plucking the legs of the grasshopper, and eventually the truck dumps and he loses his leg.
Mhm.
So my question is, but Shiva accepts it
Mm.
and does not say, okay, I'm a vegetarian and why are you this over here? So this is, this is a simple question which when we offer, what do we offer? We offer it wholeheartedly and say, please accept this.
Mhm.
This is my saying that his conscience is clear.
Yeah.
So where is the understanding when Lord Shiva himself says, okay, I fully accept this?
In fact, I think, if I'm not wrong, I think you're referring to the story of Bhakta Kannappa, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very, very famous story where Bhakta Kannappa, he was almost an aboriginal, isn't it? He was someone who lived in the woods, and he lived a life of an aboriginal. And all his life, he only grew up as someone who dwelled in the woods and the forests. And all that civilization he had was knowing of being surviving on meat. All right. And when he developed that devotion and reverence to God, he just humbly offered all what he had, all what he knew, all what he could, what he possessed. He offered it as an offering to the Lord, knowing well the Lord, in the context Lord Shiva, gracefully accepted and blessed the great Bhakta Kannappa. So it just highlights and shows that here there is no ignorance. In fact, all the knowledge he had, all what he had was offered. So I don't, in fact, this is a classic example to say that he is 100% right. You can't expect an aboriginal to be any more civilized than what he was. And that's what he was. And that's perfectly accepted, and the Lord accepted it. But perhaps you and I do that. You and I go to the jungle to hunt because Lord Kannappa offered a deer meat to the Lord, and therefore I also want to do. You will find yourself behind bars. I'll find myself behind bars because you're not supposed to hunt, especially deers. They are endangered species. You can't go into the wild and start hunting. Would you do that?
No, wouldn't do that, Guruji, but it is, my thing is, when you do something with devotion,
Mhm.
and when you do not know this is right or wrong, but the devotion supersedes everything else.
All right.
So if the devotion supersedes everything else, and so you don't have the guilt, and it's just not offering the meat or anything. This is generally in everyday life. We are doing anything with our full knowledge, our full devotion. We are doing it as the best as we can. And if we don't have the guilt feeling, and if you said ignorance is bliss, we would never know it's wrong. So how do we then correct ourselves and say, okay, unless someone points it out? And how many people will honestly point out and say, okay, this is right, this is wrong?
You have a very valid point. See, when you do not realize on your own accord whether your action is right or wrong, you can enhance your understanding either by seeking a wiser counsel, or you can pick up the shastras, pick up the scriptures, and enhance your understanding and your own wisdom, so that you're able to examine your current actions from a a grander perspective. So you're able to take a panoramic view to the very same action and look at life from a grander perspective. So that's the only way you will be able to do that. And ultimately, you fall back onto your own conscience and look at your action and say, am I doing the right thing? Am I not overdoing it? Now, for example, you may be a person who believes in a certain practice or a ritual or a belief. But let's say, just for example, let's say your children or your other family members, they don't believe in the system or in the ritual or that exercise you perform. So how is it, what is right for you may not be right for them, isn't it? It may be, it may not be acceptable by them. Then how do you take that action? Therefore, it is always subjective. So you can consult, you always have to consult your conscience. You can pick up, enhance your knowledge by surrendering to the scriptures or shastras. If there's an opportunity, take a wiser counsel so that you can get greater clarity as to how you go about your actions. These are three possible ways you can ensure that you're not on the wrong side. All right, Ma?
Right, Guruji.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome. Most welcome. Sriniji, all okay? Mickey, sir?
Yeah, all good. I just, I'm slightly a little hazy in some aspects.
No problem.
I guess I have to understand it a little more. Particularly with regard to the question I think was asked earlier about the role of conscience in society, and having lived in different continents, it seems that has a very big effect. And I think from very early childhood, the knowledge that you receive does shape what we call conscience. I think that does have an impact on it, because some people seem to have a different measure by which things are done. So, I think that you rightly said that it is subject to, it is through the dimension of time, your standards can vary. But I'm just trying to cope with the original thought a couple of lectures ago that the conscience is something which is almost the same in everybody and immutable. Whereas I see, for example, living in the US, that the death penalty is okay, or living in Europe, it's not. And, I know that's a collective conscious matter, but people seem to be quite comfortable with the idea here, which they wouldn't be elsewhere. So just need to think that through a little bit. Not that that's a big deal, because I think the bigger thing that you pointed out was the responsibility to be aware of your mind and use your intellect to continually set high standards so that you're not doing things out of ignorance and committing sin in ignorance.
Yeah.
If at least you're doing it with a feeling of guilt, you're carrying the guilt, and at least, you can regret it and correct. But I mean, I've done so many things which have been wrong without even knowing it. That's not forgivable. So that's something to think about.
No, very, very valid what you have said. Very, very valid. Mikiji, a simple example, not going up to being hanged. You and I would think twice because of the cultural upbringing and the value systems. We wouldn't even put our foot on paper, even newspaper, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because we would consider it as Saraswati. It is knowledge. Yeah. So, Michelle, just in the context, we don't stamp paper also. Other day when I received my car from servicing, they give the foot mat, they give a piece of paper, and I feel uncomfortable to put my foot on that piece of paper which is put on a foot mat. I'm just saying, what is the conscience? How does it react? This may not be. In fact, it happened in one of the lectures. A lady was attending a seminar, and she was seated in the first row, and she was so short that her feet was not touching the ground, and she had bought some books from the publications counter. They all were Gita books. So what she did, she put the books as a footrest, and the rest of the lecture, the Swami had great difficulty lecturing because he saw his books written on the Gita being used as a footrest right in front of him. Now, can you go up to her and say, you know, what are you doing? You're insulting, you're putting our scripture, you're insulting the goddess of knowledge. What is it that she is immune with? It's very difficult to decode this act, isn't it? Now, what is right for her, rightfully for her, she will say, how does it matter, man? I just need to make myself comfortable. What's the big deal? What's the big fuss you're making about? That would be her reaction, and yet we are uncomfortable. So there is no way you can, Mikiji, you can take all 7 continents into account, not a few continents, take all 7 continents. So you can't go by a particular hemisphere, a particular time zone, a particular culture, a particular act and define it right or wrong. Therefore, we made this seemingly inconsequential statement, but so important in the context. Action is always a neutral element. Action is neither good nor bad. So don't determine an action by itself as right or wrong. No action is right or wrong. We have mentioned this all through. So what determines and defines an action is your intention. In fact, just now clarifying to Lakshmi Ma, I just said, Bhakta Kannappa offered deer meat to the Lord gracefully accepted, because what else can you expect from an aboriginal? You and I do that, we are answerable to our own conscience. Man, there's so much to offer. Why are you going on a wild hunt and offering an endangered species to the Lord? So you don't go about defining it by an action. Just because it is right for you may not be right for others. Just because it's wrong for me, it doesn't have to be wrong for others. So it is always dealing with, Mikiji, if you can just clarify this, what is your conscience constantly dealing with in you?
I think at one level, it seems not to be having a conflict. It seems like the tenets are quite clear. But at the same time, and I guess it's a borderline between the conscience and the intellect, you're constantly evaluating, taking an action which prevents bad things from happening, or in your judgment, will lead to what you call the greater good, or sort of maximizing the goodness. And that may not be strictly in keeping with your conscience. And I guess that's the, the example you gave earlier, these days it's a very live matter here, at least in Texas, where a lot of people do not wear masks. It's seen as a political statement. They're seen as a letting down the political cause if you wear a mask. Now, you know that is wrong. And sometimes you see in a line in a store, a couple of people without the masks. And as you said, you don't want to make trouble, or you don't want to give knowledge. You can only wear a mask yourself, but you're actually, you feel threatened. And frankly, I don't know whether it's enough not to say anything. I think that you probably want to, literally is a matter of life and death, at least for the poor staff working there and for the hospital people. So the conscience is saying you should do something, whatever you can.
Come to India.
But at the same time, I guess you want to make a scene there and not achieve anything, then you say, okay, then I'll just stay quiet.
Mikiji, come to India. Come to India, you'll know what is the scene here. Corona never existed. It actually ran away from India, you know, the way we all are going about things in life, it never existed. What are you talking about? You go and tell Corona to someone, they say, what are you talking? I thought it's all gone, you know. So yeah, I understand and respect. Michelle, don't worry, I'm just kidding. So, you know, so Mikiji, just to clarify, again, I may perhaps be repeating, but conscience only deals with knowledge, which ends up as convictions. It deals with your emotions, keeping in mind your circumstances and conditioning elements, which is different to each individual, isn't it? It's different to the same individual at different times. So that is a dynamic situation. It's not a static millennium we're talking about. That circumstances, that knowledge quotient, that emotions, what you feel in the morning may not be acceptable feeling at night. What you feel at night. See, the expression of love to your spouse has a certain expression in the morning. The same expression has a different expression at night, isn't it? What you have love in the morning is lust at night. Now you can't express the same thing early in the morning. It is unacceptable. You know, it's yet a feeling of love and emotion. I've not said anything. I'm just saying the same emotion, what you think is right, is not acceptable at all times. The same feeling, it has a certain expression, isn't it? It is every moment to moment. So we can't view, you can't, let's say the fact that you're saying that perhaps having lived in India or in Asia for X number of years and you having lived there for X number of years, we are constantly judging them from this conditioning, from this perspective, which is not right. And how can I sit in judgment over them, or they sit in judgment over me and say this is right or that is not right? Especially, for example, I know many people have the challenge. All your children, you know, you all have lived there for 30, 40 years. Your children have grown up there and lived a certain kind, obviously conditioned with the value systems and the upbringing there. And you can have this challenge within, and you want them to pick up a certain value systems or the culture you have been brought up with, and you want them to emulate that. How right can you be without giving themselves the necessary exposure or giving them the time for them to be conditioned in a particular environment? It is not right for you to expect them to appreciate the richness of the East and appreciate the advancement of the West and have that there is a beauty in both. Why don't you appreciate both? You have the benefit of both, but they don't have. How can you be demanding? Isn't there? This is a constant challenge. I keep getting many issues concerning with parents dealing with children. You know, you want the Western comfort and not a certain Western habits. You want Eastern culture. You want Eastern habits. You want certain Indian culture, but you don't want to live in Indian conditions. You want to live in a Western condition. So you want to earn Western dollars and you want Indian culture? No, you want Indian culture, live in Indian culture and earn Indian rupees. Let go of the Western dollars. I'm not saying anything is right or wrong here, but you need to be in an environment to be conditioned by it, isn't it? The law is as you think, so you become. You are conditioned to an environment and think of it, you become it. And then you will only be judged by that. And this dichotomy, the challenge a parent has is he has a certain upbringing and is constantly evaluating the child with a certain conditioning. There is this huge challenge. You have to be very fair and very clear with reference to the child and give the benefit of doubt to the child. My child has grown up in this culture, this environment, in a European culture or Asian culture or American culture. He is bound to accept that culture and believe that is right. You can't be sitting in judgment with a different perspective and say he is wrong or they are wrong. You can't. I can't. Who is right? Who is wrong? Nobody is right and wrong. Each one is right from their perspective. So we can't take a unilateral decision for everyone. I can at best take a decision for myself and feel and see how do my emotions and thoughts resonate with the conscience. That's all I can. And certainly cannot influence that to others as well, because going earlier to Vijay Raghavanji's question, you may unsettle them. I see many parents unsettling their children because they are not able to take their conscience into account, because they may not be ready for this knowledge. They may not be ready for your advice because of their limitation. Okay, Mickey ji.
Thank you.
Right, ji. Yes, Srini ji, go ahead, please.
No, I'm just picking up from where Mickey's. So the way I internalize this is I find conscience is almost the concept of anchoring to yourself, right? So each one anchors, and the anchor, one's anchor may be slightly different to somebody else's anchor. As long as you are aligned, you feel at peace.
Yeah.
And the way I understand it is your anchor is the depth or the width, whatever you want to call it, is based on the knowledge you have imbibed yourself. The question I really have is, let us assume that people are at peace with their conscience. In this case, I am anchored myself and I'm aligned and I'm therefore at peace. But then at a broader level, how does the society get order? Because exactly to your point, what is right to me based on the knowledge I've gained, I'm okay with that, whereas somebody else's understanding and knowledge is different and they're at peace. How do you get societal harmony? Because these two could be very, very different.
Now, for example, I discovered that I had such a deep passion for this knowledge when I was 16. And it all happened the most unexpected moment of my life when I was least prepared for it, which changed the entire dynamics of my life. One evening changed the whole course of my life. I'm so glad, thankful, and grateful to my parents that they believed in my gut feeling that this is what I wanted to do. And they said, go ahead and pursue your passion. I do not know whether I would have had the conviction to say no to my parents and have plunged into this. I do not know. Today, I don't care. I would do something because this is my dharma, this is my nature. And I have to be true to my vasanas. Now, I don't do anything for a living. I've never ever received a paycheck 30 years of my life. I'm not doing this for a living. And I'm passionate about this to serve a cause I believed in right from day one. I may not be a role model for anybody to be followed. The society may say, this is a typical question I ask, then how do you make about a living? I say, I do not know. How do you meet your ends? I said, I do not know. I just function with the principle of bhiksha, the traditional concept. If people are grateful and benefited and they want to be grateful to the Guru, and I receive whatever they give. And I'm not knocking at your door. Many people come and tell me, Guruji, you must go and charge your classes. You must do this and do that. I said, I am very clear to my conscience. This knowledge is not going to be charged. And I'm not going to do it commercially to my students. I'm giving it with the spirit of service. If they believe they are being benefited and they want to be grateful, that is their call. And that's how I've been all my life. Now, this may not be the ideal system to follow, but I'm comfortable with it. Now, do I need to be mindful what the society thinks, or am I to be true to my conscience and do what is the right thing for me to do? I'm just taking something very dear, close to my life. I'm trying to share this, something which I'm so true to it, and I'm just being true to it. And that's me. So am I to dance to the tunes as to what is the trend happening today, which profession is the most happening profession? Which is it that's most rewarding? Which is it more satisfying in terms of the society's perspective, and start tuning my actions to the society's needs or expectations? Or am I to align my actions or be anchored, as you rightly said, to your own conscience? Like you also have a certain vasanas, you also have a certain dharma, isn't it? A nature.
Mhm.
Dharma is a nature. So you have to be true to your nature. And can you be convinced that I have to be true to myself? Doesn't matter what the society, my family, what others think. But if I'm passionate about medicine, I must pursue medicine. If I'm passionate about aeronautical engineering, I must passion because that is me. If I'm passionate about being a philosopher, I must be true to myself. And if I'm true to myself, I'm not false to anybody else. That's what says Shakespeare. To thine own self be true, and it must follow as night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. So even before taking the society into account, I must take my conscience into account. And yet, I must respect what the society is, what I say, how I do. I should not cause any annoyance to others. I should not annoy the world. I may want to pursue philosophy, but I should not become a hindrance to others' pursuit. Let them, as I have the freedom to pursue my conscience, I should not be imposing my views and become a thorn in others' flesh. Let them be what they are. Just because I'm right doesn't make others wrong. And that respect. And if each one is true to themselves, oh my God, we are in total harmony with the world. Because in right, I'm in harmony with myself. If I'm not wrong to myself, how can I be false to anybody else? But in being truthful to others, I can be committing a sin because I'm not true to myself. So it's very, very important that you are true to yourself at all times. And then the rest doesn't matter. I know my own cousins and uncles and aunts and all my relatives, they don't have a clue what I do. And yet they know I'm doing something, and none of them seek it, nor they endorse it, nor they support it. Does that make my action any wrong with reference to my family? Extended family? But when I'm with them, I don't give a lecture to them. I'm one with them. I meet my family, extended family in a gathering. I'm just like a cousin to them. That's all. I'm not a guru to them. I'm not a man of wisdom, and I'm trying to give out. I know I can't. They are not available for me, but I'm available for them as a mere cousin or a brother or whatever I am. So my action doesn't become wrong because I'm not being accepted by others, or just because everybody endorses me doesn't make my wrong action right. Until you're true to yourself. If you're true to yourself, rest doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Absolutely nothing matters. Because ultimately you're answerable to yourself, isn't it, Ji?
Mhm.
Whom are you with you? Who is with you most of the time? All the time, in fact.
Your conscience.
You yourself are with yourself. Your conscience, you have to be true to yourself. Has that clarified, Sriviji?
Yes. Thank you, Guruji. Yep.
All right. Ram Kondinaji, look, you have raised your hand. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Hari Om Guruji.
Hari Om, sir.
Of course, just reacting to what Srini was asking, aligning the society, I think many times it is difficult to align the family itself, because within a family, you will have so many different convictions and conscience and actions that it is not easy. So I think aligning the society is a very, very far-fetched dream, but some great people can achieve it, like people like Gandhi or somebody who can create a culture of ahimsa, and those kind of things are done by very few people. But that is just a comment on his this thing. But the question I wanted to ask was that if you take the case of Lord Rama, okay, Lord Rama lived in a time when his father and other kings had multiple wives. Okay, so there is a societal norm which becomes a part of your conviction. But in that situation, Rama decided to have only one wife, and he followed that principle. Even when Shurpanakha comes to him in the forest and says that I want to marry you, he says, no, I'm married to only Sita. Then she starts to attack Sita, right? So what made Rama stick to that particular thing in a society where his own father had 3 wives? And superimpose on that the fact that he believed that he has to follow his father's, whatever word his father gave to his stepmother, right? So which is a different conviction again, which is a different standard he was using to measure his own reaction. He could have easily told his father that, to hell with what you promised your wife, why should I go to the forest, right? He could have said that. But he didn't say that. So I think this is very different from the way we talk that if you are brought up in a family where the father is very corrupt and the son also becomes corrupt because he may become corrupt, not that he has to become, but he may become corrupt because he has an example which in a way becomes a part of his conviction and conscience eventually. So this is one way of looking at it, but there is another way of looking at it is what Rama did. So I just wanted your comment on this kind of dichotomy which can happen, which actually supports what you were saying, that it is all individual and based and there is no commonality across.
Yeah. Very, very interesting observation, I would say. I would first comment to that last statement you just passingly mentioned. When a son, just because a father is corrupt, and a son also may necessarily become, not necessarily so, and you just said actions may influence the conscience. Actions do not influence the conscience. No actions influence the conscience. It's the conscience that influences actions. It is not the other way around. So just because if I had an upbringing of a corrupt upbringing, not necessarily that kind of upbringing is going to corrupt my conscience, which can be extended to perhaps the value culture during the days of Lord Rama, where his father or king's royalty were acceptable to have multiple wives. But yet Rama so clearly held on to the concert Sita, and then he pursued so that he brings back Sita. No, in fact, the character, the portrait of Lord Rama, which is characterized by the great Valmiki in Ramayana, has many contradictions if you try to analyze the personality of Rama. Because what Valmiki has done is try to highlight the various roles a human being plays, and they highlighted that each role to a point of fault, a point of perfection. And when you take it to a point of fault, a point of perfection, you find there is a great dichotomy, there is a great disparity, because it doesn't gel. On one side, he just went by the word his father gave to his wife. On another hand, he was so what the portrays is, Rama is portrayed as an ideal husband, as an ideal father, as an ideal husband, as an ideal ruler. So he didn't want to accept Sita, so he put her through test, because tomorrow when Rama takes over the throne, we didn't want people to be talking loosely of Sita having spent so many days in Lanka. So he wanted to test her purity, and so on and so forth. So understanding the characteristics of Rama may be causing a lot of challenging contradiction because it is purposely intended only to highlight perfection in each role. So you have to take role per se. If you want to analyze Rama as a husband, take it alone per se. It may not go well with his role as a son or as a ruler, etc. But ultimately it just highlights further. If we literally want to take the role of Rama, it really highlights that it doesn't matter the external situations and circumstances. It's what you believed in. If his conviction believed that I only want to have one wife, doesn't matter whether I'm royalty, whether I accept it or not, I'll believe in that. And he held on to that system, isn't it? That belief system of his. So I don't know whether I've clarified it. Does that make sense, Ji?
Yes, thank you, Guruji.
Right, sir. Thank you. I hope we have not had an overdose of conscience. But I must say my conscience is very clear that we have had no overdose. So next week, when we all come back, I guarantee we will do Bhaj Govindam. So please do come back. All right. We will leave with these thoughts. Thank you. Hari Om.